What we're going to do today is give you some context to the hazardous waste grants. We're going to give you an overview of the objectives and the activities that will be funded, an overview of the process, and then an opportunity to answer your questions. I do ask you to please leave your questions till the end of the session. We will then be taking questions from both in the room and for those online. So, some context. These grants are being delivered as part of the Recycling Victoria policy that was recently released by the Victorian Government. This is the Victorian Government's 10-year policy and action plan to transform our recycling sector so that we can ensure that we're reducing as much waste as we can, creating jobs and set Victoria up for a more sustainable future. It outlines a platform of reform to establish a recycling system that's reliable, increases the capability and capacity of waste and recycling industry, driving investment and then creating the jobs from that investment. It's really about transitioning Victoria into that circular economy, where we really are trying to recover as much as we can and reduce the amount of waste that has to have a final destination outside of the system. It's going to be delivered alongside an investment and innovation package to provide reliable services and a strong future for the industry. So there's a number of pillars. We've got curbside reform, which really is about how Victorians change recycling. So I'm sure you all have heard about the new purple bins that are going to come in for glass. That sort of thing all fits under that. Stronger recycling oversight. So that's going to have a new act and a new waste authority to make sure that the recycling system is reliable and transparent. New rules to improve waste sorting and make sure we pay the right amount for disposing of our waste to landfill. So we can really discourage landfill. It's the price mechanism to discourage landfill and increase our recycling and recovery. Waste to energy, we know that's going to be part of our future. Managing high risk and hazardous wastes, improving the way that we do that, making sure that we are managing the risks from those, but also encouraging higher order recovery where we can do that and still manage the risk to the environment and community. Reducing business waste. So there'll be a new circular economy business innovation centre that will help businesses reduce waste and generate more value from our resources. Invest in priority infrastructure, which is part of what this grant funding is doing, and provide support for local communities and council. And then we also have a behaviour change component because we know that that's critical to actually get everything working properly. If you want more information about the policy and the action plan, you can actually find it on the Department of Environmental, Land, Water and Planning, or the DELP website, or the SV website. So this grant funding comes under what's called the Recycling Victoria Infrastructure Fund. Now, this is a package that it not only targets hazardous waste, but it's really there to make sure that when we are looking at our circular economy, we're responding to the goal, recycle more resources. So this is really about building up our ability to recycle these resources. Its intention is to stimulate investment in priority infrastructure, so it's an infrastructure grant, to support increased recycling across the state, ensuring we have viable local capacity and capability networks. Now, the reason this has been a target now, we're early into this policy, it's only just been released. This is an early fund to actually target the things that we know need to be targeted now. And it all comes from the fact that we've had lots of challenges. We've had the China ban, which has impacted on our other resources, but we've also had things like the warehouse fires, those sorts of things. We know there are market failures out there. We know there's some support that's required. So these grants are to target those known gaps in the market now. So, sorry, that's a mistake there. It's not 8 billion, it's 8 million. Apologies for the slide. It would be nice if it was 8 billion, but unfortunately not. So we've really seen that there's been some volatility in the haz waste market. The warehouse fires and the illegal stockpiles have really shown that there's a fragility there, both to the system but also to the community. So not only have those things created a risk to the community, but they've also put a cost on the community from clean-up, from handling those wastes, and also potentially into the future. We don't know what the impact has been on the environment in our community. So one of the goals of the Recycling Victoria Infrastructure Fund is to build robustness into the system. It's to say, let's remove some of those fragile touch points. And it's to build the capacity to improve the quality and quantity of materials recovered. So the specific outcomes these funds are aimed at is to increase recovery in local reprocessing of materials, increase the use and market demand of recovered materials in remanufacturing and reuse, increase the economic development opportunities such as jobs, economic performance and growth of precincts, increase the use of recycled content to make new products, and reduce the volume and environmental impact on landfill. So there is always that primary goal that we want to reduce the amount of waste going to an end fate where it can't be recovered. Now with HazWaste though, we always have to make sure that in what we are doing is maintaining public and environmental health. That is kind of something that is a given. So anything that we fund, there's a given there that what will be achieved will also reduce that impact on the environment and public health. Now, the materials being targeted by the fund are paper and cardboard, plastics, glass, and then the hazardous waste solvents that you're here for today. Information on those other streams can be found on the SV website, including their information session that was held this morning. There is a downloadable copy of that. So, if we're looking at the HazWaste grants, so the objectives of this stream of the funding is to increase the recycling of solvents from liquid hazardous wastes for reuse as solvents. We want to get those solvents back into the market. And then, where possible, maximise the higher order recovery of the secondary wastes. So those secondary wastes are the wastes that are produced through the recovery process. So whether it be distillate, the residue in the bottom pots, that sort of thing. So where we've got secondary wastes, we also want higher order recovery there where possible, and again, where we can maintain that environmental and public protection. So why are we targeting solvents? Well, SV on behalf of the government have been undertaking an analysis of the HazWaste sector to make sure that we can meet future needs. So I'm not sure who of you are aware that SV has a role in other wastes in the waste and resource recovery to actually strategically plan for the infrastructure for other wastes. We have a document that was called the SWRP, or the Statewide Waste and Resource Recovery Infrastructure Plan. It's now got a new name, or the next edition will have a new name. Hazardous waste will go into that document in a future rendition of that document. So what we've been doing is looking at all of those fragile points in the HazWaste system. We're still doing that analysis, but what we have identified is that there is an immediate gap in solvents recovery. And we all know that part of that is down to the closure of the Bradbury site, but we're also targeting solvents because they are a high risk. We know that they're a high risk, they are open to mismanagement, and they also have a potential impact on the environment and community. Now, our work may identify other gaps. In fact, we probably will. And if there are future funding rounds, they may be targeted in future funding rounds if they become available. So this stream aims to increase the capacity to recover solvents and the higher order management of secondary wastes. And we can provide up to 25% of a project's funding, capped at $6 million per project. So the specific waste streams that we're targeting really are those codes F and G. So they're the wastes generated from the production, formulation and use of paints, lacquers, varnish, resins, inks, dyes, pigments and adhesives, and organic solvents and solvent residues. So they currently have the EPA code F and G. So what will be funded? Section 4.1 in the guidelines provides you with more detail on what will be funded, but it includes things like capital costs for infrastructure, so the actual cost of infrastructure, commissioning of that infrastructure. We'll also fund pre-construction activities that allow you to put that infrastructure on your site. So whether that might be connections, whether it might be building alterations, potentially new buildings, and we are willing to fund both new, so we could have a new facility, or upgrades and expansions of existing facilities. So we're really after building that capacity and capability out there. Projects that we will fund must not have commenced construction. So anything that's already underway, already being built, is not eligible. But because we want these projects to be up and running as soon as possible, we are willing to have some infrastructure equipment that can be purchased prior to getting the funds. So if you've already ordered the infrastructure and it's coming from overseas and it's going to take some time, that's fine. That doesn't make your project ineligible. We will help you fund that, but not if it's actual construction that's started. And all projects must be completed, commissioned and operational by 30th of March 2024. They also must be located in and service Victoria. We don't mind if you get feedstocks from other states, or if the products that you manufacture or that you're reproducing or you're producing go interstate, but the facility itself must be in Victoria. And again, the whole thing is about increasing solvent recovery and solvent recycling for the use of solvents. What won't be funded? Again, there's more details in the guidelines, section 4.2. We won't fund activities not located in Victoria. We're a Victorian government fund. It's about building capacity in Victoria. We won't fund business case, research and development or feasibility studies. We're actually wanting projects that are ready to go at a commercial scale. We won't fund land purchases. We won't fund routine and cyclic works and ongoing operational costs. This is for the infrastructure. That's what the fund is for. Non-dedicated project equipment that does not contribute to increasing the recycling of solvents. So if it's not going to have any impact on the increasing recycling of solvents or the secondary waste, improve the management of those secondary wastes, we won't fund it. And we won't fund projects that will not meet regulatory and compliance requirements. So again, we will only fund things that are going to protect the environment and human health and meet all of the requirements that are out there, EPA, WorkSafe, land use planning, those sorts of things. So who can apply? The eligibility criteria are outlined in section 4.2 of the guidelines, and applicants must meet all of the eligibility requirements. So it's a pass-fail in this expression of interest stage. You must be in Victoria, again, emphasising this is for Victorian facilities. You must have a current business number, Australian business number. You must meet or exceed the minimum co-contribution, and so that is on a 1 to 3 basis. So SV is willing to fund 25% of project costs, capped up at $6 million per project. You also must agree to comply with SV's funding agreement and SV's term of participation in a grant program. So these were in the registration email that you all received when you submitted a registration of interest. Now you can still receive funding if you are getting funding from another government source for these activities, but that funding can't be part of your co-contribution. So the process, it's a two-stage process. This is the expression of interest stage. And then that leads on to a detailed business case, application and business case. The idea to do that is really to actually screen projects as they come in. We don't want you putting an awful lot of effort into doing a business case if we think it's not going to get funding in the final round. So this is really just a screening. We've tried to keep the information that we need to a minimum, but still enough to give us enough information to actually assess whether your project is going to move on or not. So the purpose of this expression of interest is to shortlist the projects that meet eligibility and assessment criteria for funding, and to invite applicants to submit a detailed application and business case. So we're open now, and it closes on the 3rd of April. Then, should you be successful, you go on, so you're shortlisted and you go on to stage 2, and you'd be invited to submit a detailed application and business case. And that's to assess the project that best achieve the objectives of the fund and recommend successful projects for funding. The indicative timeline for the commencement of this stage is June 2020. We hope we can speed it up, but that's probably as fast as we can go. We need to wait for a whole lot of governance arrangements, and we're hoping that the expressions of interest recommendations will be approved. Stage 2 guidelines, including the assessment criteria and requirements for funding, will be released to a successful stage 1 applicant at the completion of the stage 1. So if you're shortlisted, we'll then give you all the information about what's going to be in the stage 2. However, applicants that do proceed to stage 2 will be required to undergo an independent third-party financial viability check and must provide financial information requested by SV or your contractor. You'll also be required to undergo checks with EPA, WorkSafe Authority and other regulators about your safety and regulatory performance. Applicants in stage 1 will also need to declare a conflict of interest and acceptance of the terms of the funding agreements and terms of participation. Basically, you need to fill out the application form. So it is a competitive, merit-based assessment. Again, the assessment criteria are outlined in section 6 of the application guidelines. So please, this information is in the application guidelines. Work your way through it. And if you have any questions, then there's a process for you to ask questions outlined on the web. The applications will be assessed by a panel of experts in a competitive merit-based assessment. That panel is cross-government, so it's SV, the Department of the Environment, Land, Water and Planning, Department of Jobs, Precincts and Regions, and the Department of Treasury and Finance are all on that panel. And then we're advised by some commercial and technical experts to give us advice on your projects. The criteria is designed to provide SV with information on does your project look like it's going to achieve the objectives, and should it go on to stage 2. So in the what section, it's about what is being proposed. It's a description of the project. Tell us what you want to achieve, what you're going to do. It's what feedstocks you're going to use. Where are you going to get the waste from? What are those wastes? Are they coming from spray panel people, that sort of thing? Where are you getting them from? Are they coming interstate or local? Again, the project is eligible if it's getting the wastes from interstate, but we need to be based in Victoria. The products that you're going to make, and what market have you got? Do you know if there's a market there? We hope that you do have that information already, so that we know that when you produce these products, you're actually going to be able to sell them or use them moving on. And the secondary wastes and their treatment pathway. Again, emphasising where possible, higher order management, but even if you can't do a higher order management, we want to make sure that you know what you're going to do with those secondary wastes, and we know that there's the infrastructure then to manage those secondary wastes. Who's going to undertake the project? What are your capabilities and your capacity to do so? What's your track record on delivering a project of this scale? Not necessarily in this field, but at this scale. Have you delivered projects for the government before? Have you had funding from SV before? The how, quite important. How are you going to do it? The technology that you propose, the ability for you to manage fluctuations in feedstocks and also end markets. So what are you going to do if you get too many feedstocks coming in at the one time for you to process? Or what if you don't get enough? What's your robustness of what you're doing? How it will demonstrate high order recovery of both these wastes and the secondary feedstocks. An understanding of what the regulatory and compliance requirements are going to be or are already for your process. So remember, we've got a new Act coming into place on the 1st of July, new regulations coming out from the EPA. How are you going to meet these? And the timeliness of when your project will be up and running. We really are keen on getting things happening as soon as we can. So if your project could be considered a bit more favourably if it is actually ready to hit the ground, but that doesn't rule out projects that are not as ready, provided they can be ready by March 2024. You'll need to answer all the questions in the application form, keeping your answers clear and concise, please. So the more clear you can be on what you need to do, the easier it is to understand your project and to assess it. Applications may proceed to stage 2 if they meet all the eligibility criteria and the assessment criteria. We do have the right to adjust the rankings to get an overall mix of the projects that come in. So if we get 10 projects that are all the same, we may have a look at, for example, where they are based, regionally versus metropolitan. And we may say, well, it's actually a good idea to spread it around the state a bit more. That's the sort of thing that we can do. Again, information in the guidelines. Please make sure you read the guidelines. Please make sure you fill out all of the application forms. Due diligence. This is really quite important for these haz waste projects. If you proceed to stage 2, you will have, I think this is a repeat of what I've already told you, an independent third-party financial viability check and must provide financial information when requested. Checks with EPA, Victorian Work Cover, WorkSafe and other regulatory bodies. You'll also need to declare a conflict of interest. So submitting your expression of interest application. Check if you are eligible. If you have any doubts, ask some questions through the process. Check the eligibility of your project. Read and accept the terms of the conditions for the SV funding agreement. Read and understand the terms of participation in the grants program. Complete the expression of interest form attached and submit your application by 3 p.m. Friday, the 3rd of April. So some key dates. Again, these are in the guidelines. They're probably fairly straightforward. We're open now. EO expressions of interest close on 3 p.m. Friday the 3rd of April. We hope to notify you May and invite you to participate around June. We'll give you probably 8 weeks, at least 6 to 8 weeks to make your business case and submit that. Notification of the outcome by October. We hope to have all the agreements established by December and project delivery from 2021 to 24, March 24. So we certainly hope that those timelines can be met, if not improved upon. We will certainly be doing our best to improve upon those. So some frequently asked questions. Am I eligible if I'm located in another state but manage wastes from Victoria? No, you're not. The infrastructure must be in Victoria and it must service the Victorian industry, either through the waste you're going to use or the products that you're producing. Either way, but it must build that capacity in Victoria. Why are the grants focused on solvents? I think we covered that earlier on, but it's really about us identifying a current gap in the system to have the higher order recovery for solvents for reuse as solvents. Are waste to energy projects viable? Not at this stage, they are not. This fund is seeking to expand the capacity to recycle solvents, not for the reuse for energy, but for reuse as solvents. And that includes where solvents are being used to develop a process-derived fuel. So they are not covered under these grants. It is recognised, however, that some of the secondary wastes may be appropriate to have a waste for energy solution for those. So that makes it, they're eligible, but the primary focus is to recover the wastes, the solvents, for reuse as solvents. I do not have the required EPA or land use planning approvals for the proposed activities. Can I still apply? You can still apply if you don't have the approvals right now. In fact, if it's a new process for you, we wouldn't expect you necessarily to have those approvals yet. But you must be able to demonstrate, one, that you can get approvals. The activities that you're undertaking will meet regulatory and planning requirements. Again, with the planning activities on your land, they will meet all the requirements needed under those planning conditions. You also must demonstrate that you know the pathway on how to get them, that you know what you need to do to get those approvals and requirements. And you must demonstrate that it is highly likely that you will be able to do that in the timeframes that you have. The project will not be funded if you do not have the regulatory approvals by March 2024. Will you fund a project if it has already commenced or been completed? No. This is about new projects, new or expanded facilities or upgrades. However, we will allow for the purchase to have commenced for some of your capital costs, capital infrastructure, particularly where it's coming overseas. Can I receive other government funding? So if you are getting funding from other government sources, whether they're local government, federal or other state government departments, yes, that is fine. But as I mentioned before, you can't include it in your, I've lost my words now, in your leverage. You can't include it in your contribution, your co-contribution. So again, that co-contribution is 1 from the government to 3 for you. So basically 25% of the project up to a capped at $6 million. So that really is about all that I've got, but I'm really happy to take your questions. So firstly, we might go here in the room and then we will move on to those online. So is there any questions from here? Yes.
Hi, David Vincent from Global Resource Recovery. A question, if the project is higher than 6 million, do you have to cap it at 6 or can it be 8 and you say it's 6 or divided into 2 projects?
The $6 million is the cap on how much we will fund you. So yes, right. The project can be so worth more than
10 and you'll still get 1 point.
So actually, yeah, to get the whole 6 million, you'd actually have a $24 million project because you need to put 3.
Well, didn't you say the cap is 6 though?
The cap for government, for the funding that we will provide you is $6 million per project. So if we put in $6 million, we would expect $18 million to be put in by you, which would make it $24 million all up.
Okay, I hadn't understood. I thought it was 6 million per project.
That's the capping on the funding that's eligible. So we have up to $6 million for each project, but we will cap that at $6 million.
But it's an $8 million fund.
No, it's not. We've actually got that $8 million is a mistake. That $8 million is a mistake. So we'll have to correct that slide before we put it online.
That was about the entire fund. There's 3 other funding streams, and one of those has got a cap of 8 million.
Yes, so I think we've just copied it over. So we have a cap of $6 million per project. But on that requirement that you provide $3 for every $1, and we are not going to necessarily spend all of that $6 million on every project.
No, I understand.
It will be up to us how much. So you might still put forward a project of $24 million, but we may not provide the whole $6 million for that.
One other question, just in relation to works approval. Does the fund cover cost of applying for a works approval for the project?
No, we don't. We will look at that on a case-by-case basis, and we will cover probably some costs or potentially some costs associated with getting approvals, but we wouldn't cover the cost of applying for the approval. That would be seen as core business for you. Yeah. Any other questions? So we might go to people online.
Sure. Start with the first one. Can I submit more than one application?
Yes, you can. You can submit more than one application. I'm just looking for my cheat sheet of answers. Yes, you can submit more than one application, but they will be considered as multiple projects, and they all still individually have to meet the eligibility criteria and the assessment criteria and demonstrate how they address the objectives of the project.
Great. Will we need to lease the site as part of our project? Sorry, we will need to lease the site as a part of our project. Would this be covered under the funding?
Look, again, I refer you back to section 4.2 of the guidelines, which is what will be covered, but leasing is considered to be a routine cost and an ongoing cost, so it won't be covered, as purchase of the land also won't be covered.
Can SB review a draft of our grant application or assist in my application?
No, we can't. This is a competitive process, so we won't be offering a service like that to actually review what you're doing. And we can't provide feedback until we get your application, and it will be provided through the application process. It won't be done before that.
Why is local government not eligible for funding?
Primarily because these grants are aimed at large-scale infrastructure. We're not targeting local government at this stage. We've targeted local government in other infrastructure grants that we've been given out lately, and we may have those as a target in future ones, but not for this project.
Okay. And the last question I have here is, for the full application, will there be supporting documents? For instance, will it need a project plan or anything more in-depth, like an economic impact assessment?
So the guidelines for stage 2, the full business case and application, are being developed at the moment, and they will be released before the expressions of interest close. But yes, there will be supporting guidelines and documents for those.
And that's all the questions.
Last chance. Are there any more questions from in the room? So if you do have further questions, you can email grants inquiries. So that's all on the website. Please put in the subject line RVIF, being Recycling Victoria Infrastructure Fund, and then Hazardous solvents, so that we know that where it's come from and that you'll be responded to as part of that process. And again, I thank you for giving us your time today, and we look forward to getting your applications. So thank you.